Hey there drone fans, Rick here again from Drone Valley. In today's clip, I'd like to offer my thoughts and predictions for what the brand new Mavic Pro II might look like when it's released later this year. Now before I get too deep into the conversation, I know there's a lot of clips out there already where people are making guesses as to what features and functions and specifications might be included in the new quad, but the honest truth is none of us know. Well, that's not entirely true. Obviously, the wizards at DJI that have been working on that new quad for the last year or two, they know what's going on. And there's a small group of beta testers inside of DJI that fly that product through its various stages of development. They report back to the design engineers. They'll make changes to the body or the specifications in the software to make it fly a little bit better. Those beta testers know. And I'm also convinced there's probably a small group of YouTubers out there that may have already gotten their hands on this product in advance of the release date so they can be working furiously on clips to be ready to release those the day of the announcement. I'm not part of any of those groups. As hard as I've tried over the last couple of years, banging on the door of DJI, ringing their doorbell, sending them emails, I've not yet been invited to any of those groups. But that's a good thing because since I'm not part of that secret society, I'm free to talk about anything I want to talk about. So once I join that group, I'm under the same NDA all those people are under, which means I'm going to stop doing these clips. So if you see this channel stop doing these kind of predictive clips, you know I've gotten that secret handshake and I've been invited in, which I guess is a good thing, but it's a bad thing for you guys because I don't get a chance to do these kind of clips. So what I'm going to do today, unlike a lot of the other clips that are out there, is I'm not a big fan of just throwing darts at a wall and sort of saying, hey, this would be cool if it was in there. I really like to take a scientific approach to these kind of predictions. So what I typically do is look at the product that was released last, which is the Mavic Pro, and then look at some of the technological advances that have taken place since that product hit the street, and then think to myself, if I were designing the new quad, which of these features and functions would I build into it? And if I did that, what would it look like at the end? So exactly what I'm going to do for you in this clip is give you sort of an understanding of what changes I expect to have happen over the original Mavic Pro to the Mavic Pro II, and then back it up with some sort of scientific discussions and some specifications so it isn't just a wild guess on my part. Now, whenever I'm looking at a quad, just like you guys, there's probably 3 or 4 things that I care about. They would include things like how long will the quad fly? How do I control it? What kind of autonomous features are built in? How sophisticated is the software to follow something, avoid something, do tricks in the air, or do special camera perspectives automatically or autonomously? So what kind of artificial intelligence is built in? And then the last thing, which is really the first thing for me, is the reason I buy the quad is to put this flying camera up in the sky. So how good is the camera? Right? That's an important feature in any quad that's out there. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time in each of these and kind of give you an overall view of what I think the Mavic Pro II is going to look like. Now, I'm also going out on a limb here because I'm going to predict a release date. And if I nail it, that'll be pretty cool, right? But I have, again, no inside information. So everything I talk about is based on my research over the last couple of months of where I think that product would go. And if I were working for DJI in charge of that product, here's the product I put out in the street. So it'll be kind of fun to see how close I get with this. Now, if you're watching this DJI, I don't know if you watch these clips anymore or not, but if you're watching the clip, invite me into the group. I'm telling you, I could be a huge resource for you on the inside, and I promise to stop doing these clips. But anyway, that's my little plea there to DJI. But stay tuned and I'll get into each of these sections and we'll have a little bit of fun talking about them. In this section, I'll cover some of the camera changes I expect you'll see in the brand new Mavic Pro II. Now, I made this its own section on purpose because for me, the camera is one of the most important factors in any decision I make when I'm comparing 2 quads against each other, whether that be for purchase or deciding which one I'm going to fly for that afternoon. Because honestly, when I go out there to fly, I usually put the quad up to get it to a particular location, and I really want to capture the best video footage and pictures I can of that location. But the other decision is, how portable is the product, right? So the Mavic Pro has proven to be an incredibly portable product. I take it with me everywhere, but there are occasions where I'm going to a location, I have one day to get that shot. Maybe it's a special vacation or I'm going to a part of the country that I don't normally travel to, and maybe I really do want to have better quality video there. So I'm willing to put up with the additional hassle of taking a bigger quad along, because a lot of people ask me, well, Rick, since you fly the Mavic Pro II, why do you still have a Phantom 4 Pro in your fleet, and why do you fly the Inspire 2? It comes down to quality. So with the Mavic Pro, I'm totally fine with the micro 2/3 sensor and the video quality it puts out when I'm out there flying for fun. But if I've got to go out on a location that I may not get a chance to go back to ever again, I'm going to bring the Phantom 4 Pro with me. If it's a really important location, I'm going to drag the Inspire 2 with me because great quality, even better quality at the Inspire level. So wouldn't it be great if I had this kind of quality in that kind of portability. And I think that's exactly what they're going to go for in this brand new Mavic Pro II. And there's also a couple other factors. The Mavic Pro II can't be as expensive as the Phantom 4 Pro, right? So one thing that's helped that is the sensor pricing has come down considerably over the last year and a half. The other thing that's going to drive the decisions in there is the competition's heating up. So there's this tiny little company called Autel that at CES showed a brand new product called the Evo, which is going to be released with a 1-inch sensor. So I think the Mavic Pro II, if it comes out with a micro 2/3 sensor, no matter how good it is, it's going to be behind the curve. And I think that's driving a lot of the decisions of where the sensor was going on this particular product. So my prediction for this brand new Mavic Pro II will be a 1-inch sensor. Because Sony has dropped the price on a lot of their sensors, I think it makes perfect sense. But the challenge is putting that size camera on that size quad is a challenge, because it's not just a matter of bolting the sensor on the front of it. The sensor is going to be bigger, it's going to weigh more, which means there's going to be more work that the actual stabilizers have to do, the gimbals have to be beefier, so the whole camera assembly is going to be bigger. If I put more weight in the front of the quad, it's going to throw its center of balance off. So does that mean, of course it means a redesign, but does that mean they're moving a lot of the weight to the back to counterbalance that? So the design decisions aren't just a matter of taking that sensor and slapping it on the Mavic that's out there today, but I fully believe that this new Mavic Pro II is going to have a 1-inch sensor. I believe if you look at the specs that I'm showing you now, Sony's come out with a bunch of sensors that have 4K at 60 frames per second, 20 megapixel pictures inside of it. I also believe that it'll do super slow-mo at 120 frames per second. So filming out there and capturing that in slow motion will be something that'll be built into it. We've already seen that out there on the Mavic Air. They've got super slow-mo involved in that. So it isn't just a matter of having a better sensor or a bigger sensor. It's going to mean a redesign of the quad, and I'll get into that in the next section or section down the road. But it also means that the technology inside of it, the processing power, the horsepower inside that quad, has to be able to handle that 4K image at 60 frames per second at whatever bit rate it's throwing it at. It has to be able to process that and store that off to a memory card. So with the advancements we've seen in the Mavic Air, we now know they have the horsepower inside that quad in the Mavic Air to actually process 100 megabits a second, which is a pretty fast bit stream. So I expect this will be able to do it as well when we get to the Mavic Pro II. The other thing that I think might be interesting, and this is something I'm hoping they're doing, and this is kind of my coaching to the guys at Autel, was if you're going to release that Evo, and you're going to release it initially with a micro 2/3 sensor, you're already behind the curve. So don't release the 2/3 sensor, wait and release it with a 1-inch sensor. They've also got a model that has a 360-degree camera on it. So that's kind of cool, right? Because I would like to take those kind of spherical shots or those VR shots where I can come back and edit them later on, but those are different models. So my coaching to those guys was around the concept of why would you release one model with a 1-inch sensor, one model with a micro 2/3, and a third model with a 360 sensor? Why not make it a removable payload? It can't be that big a deal to have a little plate that camera's mounted on with connections on the back. Disconnect, slide off, slide a new camera on there. So that way I buy one airframe, Mavic Pro II, and I have maybe a 360 option, a 1-inch sensor option. Maybe I'm doing IR, if I'm doing some kind of night vision kind of stuff. So it would give DJI, if I were designing it, it would give DJI the ability to sell you one airframe, but have a constant stream of upgrades in the imaging quality on the front. So the last thing I'll say is I expect there may be a removable payload. I've got my fingers crossed that that's going to happen, but how cool would it be to have the 1-inch sensor on here with the 4K 60 frames a second and have the ability to swap out that camera for something later on. So I know I'm going out on a limb there, but I think technologically it's entirely possible to build sort of a little sliding plate with the camera mounted to it that allows you to change out that camera to constantly upgrade the camera as innovation takes place in the sensor quality. So again, 1-inch sensor on the camera, 20 megapixel pictures. It's going to do 4K at 60 frames a second. I believe it'll do 120 frames per second slow-mo. And my last prediction, which is a bit of a wild card, is that it'll have a removable payload that'll allow you to swap in different cameras down the road as upgrade options, much like the Inspire 2 does today. So we'll see how close I am on the imaging systems. In this section, I'll give you my thoughts on what might change with the remote controller for the brand new Mavic Pro II. Now, if you're a fan of the channel, you know that a few months ago, my son and I got on an airplane, flew to Las Vegas to attend CES, and we spent 2 days on the floor of that show, searching out all the drone companies we could find to ask them 2 basic questions. The first one was, what's different about your drone that separates it from everybody else on the planet today? But more importantly, what technological advances are you going to incorporate into your next generation quad to really put it out ahead of the pack? And more often than not, the answer I got back was some form of, we're building a much more integrated solution. And what they meant by that was they're taking the remote controllers and making them more intelligent. They're putting FPV displays in them. They're giving you the ability to edit footage inside those remote controllers. And I thought, you know what? That is unique. That's something that DJI does today for their higher end models, but not necessarily for their entry-level models or their prosumer models. So when I spent time with the Autel guys, we were in their booth for quite some time. They just wouldn't stop talking about their remote for the Evo because it's got a little display built into it that does telemetry information, characteristics about the drone. It gives you all the good stuff you need, but it also has a little display that shows you an FPV view of what the camera sees. So you could essentially fire up that remote, fire up the drone, and fly it without using any phone or tablet attached to it. And I thought that was pretty cool. Now, it may be a little gimmicky because the display is pretty small, so for old guys like me, I can't really do any precision flying with that. I'm going to still need a phone or a tablet attached to it, but it is nice to have it there as sort of a backup if my phone fails, or maybe if I'm younger, I can see the display and I can actually fly by it. The one that really impressed me, though, there was another company there that built a display, I should say built a remote, with a big display up top and a big display down the bottom, about 7 inches, I think, between the two of them. The top one was for telemetry information and characteristics of flight. The bottom one was a pure FPV view, so you're flying with this thing, looking at that display, seeing exactly what's going on through the quad. The thing that I liked so much about it, though, is they took the extra step to allow you to do full editing there of any information or video you downstream to it. You could edit it, and you could post it to a social media site. So that really is a complete solution. And again, DJI's done that on some of their bigger quads, but they've kind of evolved as a company. So they started, with these basic models for like the Spark and the Mavic Air. They've got the Mavic Pro product that's got a display in here that's monochromatic, and it gives you a lot of flight characteristics and battery indicators and all the stuff you'd need to fly your quad, but it doesn't give you enough PV view. You've got to still tether a phone or a tablet to it. And that's the part that still confounds me, because I'll bet you, I don't know this for a fact, but I'll bet if you looked at all the calls that DJI gets, people that can't get their drones flying, I'll bet a large majority of them are because they're trying to make their phone or their tablet work with the remote control and the software. I know I get a ton of emails and I try to help people all the time, but it's still kind of, to me, an archaic system where I'm bringing my own phone or tablet, which, again, let's agree, there's a large, wide landscape of products out there, and it's a real hassle to get them working with the remote. So if DJI was smart with this new product, and I think they're really smart, they'll build a remote that'll give you the ability to have an FPV view built in. Now, the problem with that is that it has to be a pretty good size display, which means they're going to have to change the size of the remote, but more importantly, it's going to raise the price. So my prediction around the remote is that you'll see two versions of the Mavic Pro II come out. You'll see one that'll have a very basic display like this that'll do telemetry just like the Mavic Pro does. You'll still use a phone or a tablet to connect up to it. And there'll be a Mavic Pro II Plus that'll actually have the ability to either have a fully integrated display like these guys do, or a removable display. Because how cool would it be, like with the Inspire 2 remote, this is the Phantom 4 Pro Plus model, which has the display in it, that's attached to it. You can't take it off. This one you can take off. I should also point out that both of these displays are running a custom version of Android, so everything you need to do to fly that quad is built into this remote. And that's nice because DJI controls that environment and you can't really sideload applications and screw things up. So they're guaranteeing you a great user experience with it. But I never liked the fact that I couldn't take this display off and it wasn't easy to tether another display to it. So it was great for flying, but it was still a small display. I like the way this works because I can pull this display off the remote. And wouldn't it be cool if the new Mavic Pro II allowed me to tether this to the bottom of the Mavic Pro II without having some wonky bracket on it. So I'm thinking that the Mavic Pro II Plus will have probably a smaller display in this. Maybe it'll be a 7-inch, maybe it'll even have a 10-inch version, I don't know, that'll attach to it. So my prediction would be a basic model and a Plus model that'll have some integrated display that'll give you an FPV view. Now I also know that, I'm pretty sure, that the quad is developed by one engineering team, the remote's developed by a second engineering team, the Crystal Sky team I think is a completely different division inside of DJI. So it is going to take a little bit of cooperation between these two guys. But again, as somebody who designed products in my life as an engineer, I think they're missing a huge opportunity by not allowing me to upgrade the remote by adding a display to it later on, and maybe even a bigger display if I choose to. So my first prediction is they're going to have two models, the basic model and the Plus model. The Plus model will have some FPV control available in the remote itself. The second thing I'm going to talk about is the connection topology. So in years past, whether you're using the Inspire or using this Phantom 4 Pro, you've used Lightbridge technology. These two guys, Lightbridge or Lightbridge 2. This is OcuSync. the Spark and the Mavic Air are using Wi-Fi. I expect the Mavic Pro II will use some version of OcuSync. It may actually be an updated version of OcuSync, maybe OcuSync 2. But the one wildcard I'm going to throw out there, because this is an evolving technology that a lot of drone companies are talking about, I wouldn't be surprised at all if the quad had the ability to slide a SIM chip in it. So you could actually connect up to a cellular network, either 3G or 4G. And I know there's all kinds of issues out there about, gee, there's going to be lag over the cellular network because it's digital transmissions. Companies have figured that out. So if they add a SIM card to the quad and you tether this to your phone that's also got a SIM card in it, you can connect over cellular to fly your quad. So maybe OcuSync is your primary connection topology and the cellular is your backup in case you lose your OcuSync connection. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if the new remote control supported a SIM card, or at least tethering a device that had a SIM card as an alternate channel of connection. So we'll see how that plays out. But those are my predictions in general. So I expect the remote will be slightly larger. There'll be two versions of it, a basic model and a plus model that'll have a detachable display or actually a built-in FPV display. And I would not be shocked if they don't give you the option to add some type of SIM connectivity for a topology to control that quad. So those are my predictions for the remote. We'll have to see how close I get. It should come as no surprise that the battery for the brand new Mavic Pro II will have to undergo some major design changes as well to support the quad. And in a lot of ways, this topic was the most interesting one for me to think through, because that battery design, whatever they settle on, will in large part determine not only how far the quad can fly and how long it can stay aloft, but also how much other high-tech electronics the engineers at DJI can pack into that airframe. Because remember, that battery not only supplies power to the motors to keep the quad up in the air, but all the other sophisticated electronics inside that airframe, including GPS, telemetry, OcuSync, video streaming, coordination of flight patterns, are all drinking electrons out of that battery. So I imagine there's a constant conversation between the battery design team and all the other technologies that are in there about how much current are you drawing? No, you can't have that much, and you guys need to be more efficient. And there's probably a fist fight that goes on every week about that. I'm shocked they're even talking to each other by the time this thing is released. But it'd be simple if the battery team could just pick the biggest battery they can find and slam it in the frame. But I've done clips before on a concept called energy density, and what that has to do with is how much capacity a battery has versus how much it weighs. And you'll find that there's a delicate balancing point where even if you could put a bigger battery in the quad, the additional energy you'd burn up keeping that heavier battery in the air, it turns into a law of diminishing returns, so it doesn't make sense. So finding that perfect balance point between what I'll call functions and flight time is really a hellacious kind of thing to come up with. So that battery design team is a really important component inside the quad. And all of us know that even if it's got a ton of high-tech gear inside of it, if it doesn't fly longer than the Mavic at 30 minutes or the Mavic Pro Platinum at 33 minutes, if it doesn't substantially extend that flight time, all of us are going to complain about that. So I'm sure the propulsion team said, look, if we shut all this other stuff down, we could fly for an hour. But you can't. You got to have the electronics in there as well. So that battery team has to take all that stuff into consideration. Now, the other challenge for them is that unlike a lot of the systems inside the quads that DJI design, the battery is not entirely under their control because they're not a chemistry company. They don't control the evolution of lipo technology and the chemistry behind it. That's a completely separate business. And in fact, DJI doesn't even build their own batteries. They subcontract that out to a company called Ampex Technology in China. So I thought, wouldn't it be fun if I went on their site to see what kind of advancements they've had in battery technology to try and predict where I think this Mavic Pro II battery is going to land. Now, I've got a couple of batteries in front of me on the table. I think it's also interesting to look at how these batteries have evolved for the different technologies. So this one over here is the one for the Spark product. It's the smallest battery they make. Actually, that's not true. The Tello product has a smaller battery. I don't have a Tello yet, but that's the Spark battery. That's the Mavic Air battery. That's the Mavic Pro battery. You should recognize that one. That's a Phantom 4 Pro battery here. And then I've got the Inspire 2 battery up top. And all of these batteries have gotten higher energy densities where they've packed a lot more energy into the same footprint for about the same weight. So I think that you'll find that, let me get these guys out of the way. You'll find that the new Mavic Pro II battery will land somewhere between these two guys and probably closer to the Phantom battery than the Mavic battery today. Now, let me go through a couple of dry specifications, and then I'll give you a prediction of where I think that battery is going to land and what kind of flight time you can expect. So let's start with the Mavic Pro battery. That battery came out as an 11.4 volt battery. It's a 3S battery, which means you've got 3 cells inside there that are all at 3.8 volts that are wired in series to give you the 11.4 volts. It's got 3830 milliampere hours of current available on it and a capacity, and that means it's got an energy capability of 43.6 watt hours, which is pretty impressive for its small size. When I look at the Phantom 4, you'll notice the battery voltage is higher because it's a 4S battery, which means it's got 4 of those 3.8 volt cells wired in series to give you a total of 15.2 volts. It's also got a higher capacity of 5870 milliampere hours for a total energy capacity of 89.2 watt hours. So it's my belief that the Phantom battery is probably the voltage they're going to go with. So I expect that the Mavic Pro II will jump it up to a 4S, which means you'll have a battery voltage of 15.2 volts. I also believe they'll increase the capacity based on all the research I've done on batteries that are out in the market today and some of the advancements for Ampex Technologies batteries. I expect that capacity of the Mavic Pro II battery would be 4,500 milliampere hours, which puts it at about a 68.4 watt hours capacity overall. So what that means for you in real terms, if they don't build in a lot of like energy hungry technology into it, that you should expect an extended flight time. Now I'm going to put that flight time at somewhere between 35 and 40 minutes based on these numbers that I just gave you. And I may be totally off on that, but I also feel like if you don't give me another 6 or 10% of flight times out there, that it may be a disappointment for people in the field. So expect the battery to come out with the specifications I've talked about. It'll be a bigger battery. Bigger battery is going to be a little heavier. I talked before about how there's going to be a bigger camera on the product, which means I'm going to have a bigger airframe. So even with the additional capacity built into that battery, it's not like you're going to get double the flight time out of it because of all those other factors I mentioned. But I wouldn't be shocked at all if we came close to a 40-minute, between a 35 and a 40-minute flight time, and I may be wrong and it may even go to 45 minutes, which would be amazing if it did that. But those are my assumptions on the battery, so let's see again how close I come when this product is actually released. Now I'll cover some of the changes I expect to show up in the airframe in the new Mavic Pro II. I've already mentioned that I think some of the systems on the new quad are going to be larger. I talked about having a larger 1-inch sensor on the front for the camera assembly. Because of that larger size, it's going to be heavier, which means I'm going to need bigger gimbals and beefier gimbals and mounting systems. So that's going to require the airframe to be slightly larger. Now I've seen some predictions out there that say it's going to be substantially larger. I don't expect that to happen. I think it'll be a slight increase in size to accommodate both the camera up front, the larger battery that's needed to keep it aloft for longer flight times, but I don't expect it to be dramatically different. I do expect some of the design elements of the Mavic Air to make their way into the Mavic Pro II. This was their first iteration quad, and I'll be honest with you, it blew me away when it first hit the street. It was really an epiphany of design. No one at that point had built a sleek folding quad that had the specifications that the Mavic Air had, so they really broke ground with this technology. I expect the Mavic Pro II will look a lot like this one. It'll have a lot of the same folding features, but it'll have a much more aerodynamic and streamlined design like the Mavic Air. Having said that, I expect a lot of the technology in here will come from the advancements that they built into the Mavic Air. So things like visual inertial odometry will be built in there, so it'll be able to track a path and keep track of where it went and get back quicker. It's going to have that APAS system in there for crash avoidance in the woods. It may even be more sophisticated. I fully expect that it's going to have crash protection or obstacle avoidance front, bottom, and back with optics, so it's going to give you the same protections you've got on this guy. And how cool that you can have a quad this size sort of fly through the forest at speed and dodge trees and not have to worry about crashing into a tree. I also think they're going to upgrade the ESCs that control the motors to the new sinusoidal ESCs, which gives you a much quieter quad, a much more efficient quad, and it's going to be able to also beef up, I think, the motors a little bit. So I think the motors on the new Mavic Pro II will be a little bit larger because, remember, a bigger airframe, maybe slightly larger propellers, a little beefier motor to keep that up in the air. So I think all those changes are going to happen, but fundamentally I expect it's going to look very, very similar to what we've got here. I also think you'll see folding props on it. You'll probably see the folding props very similar in design to the ones that came with the Mavic Pro Platinum. Those low noise, high efficiency props will be on there as well. And I'd mentioned the 3-direction crash avoidance. So in a lot of ways, this is not the most exciting change that I expect to have happen. A lot of the other stuff I talked about I think is way more intriguing than this, but the airframe itself was an almost perfect design the day it hit the street. if I were designing this quad, I would take this airframe, make the modifications I had to make to accommodate the larger camera, maybe the removable payload camera, and the larger battery, and just release that as the new product. I don't think they're going to release it in colors. I may be wrong on that. I think it'll come out, it is either black or white, maybe those two choices, or maybe just plain black like they've done with the Obsidian version and the black version of the Mavic Air, but we'll have to see how that plays out. But those are my predictions for what the airframe changes might look like. In this last section, I'm going to try and zero in on a possible release date for the Mavic Pro II. Now, this is easily the most wild card thing that I'm selecting because I have no way of knowing when this thing comes out. I will tell you that if my date is correct, these things are in full production already. They're in the hands of reviewers already. There's promotions being lined up. There's venues being rented. There's a bunch of marketing material that's all ready to go. And I'm sure the factories in China have been chugging out the Mavic Pro II for the last couple of weeks. So if I'm right on this, you should see it pretty soon. Now, I'm not just taking a wild guess. Obviously, I can't just throw a dart at the calendar and say, hey, that's the date. I'm also not Nostradamus or the Amazing Kreskin, so I have no crystal ball I can go to and go, that's the date, let's release it that date. But if I'm in their camp and I'm deciding from a marketing perspective and engineering perspective, because remember, it's got to be ready to release before marketing can say we're going to release it. But there's a couple of things driving that decision. The first one is a little product I talked about before called the Autel Evo. They've talked about releasing that thing in the April timeframe. So if I'm DJI and I've got the only competitor that's got a reasonable folding drone, possibly with a 1-inch sensor, hitting in April, I want to beat him to the punch. And if you think back to when the Mavic Pro hit, I think it was in response to the Karma that came out from GoPro. All of us thought that, right? The Karma was announced, looked like a really cool quad, it was folding, and DJI probably had the Mavic Pro just about ready, and they said, holy smokes, we can't let those guys capture first mover advantage. They released the Mavic Pro. I think that Evo is a real enough product and a competitive enough product that it's going to drive the release of this in advance of the Evo hitting the street. So from my perspective, that hits April. DJI's got to get the Mavic Pro II out in the street sometime in March. The other thing that could drive that decision is that it's common sense that we've all been cooped up for the winter, right? And a lot of people that have been holding back from buying the quad, springtime hits, they're thinking about getting outside, they've been arguing with their wives or their friends about buying the quad, and finally they're saying, you know what, I'm buying the quad, it's springtime, I want to fly this summer, and they're going to buy the quad. So that again puts us in that March-April timeframe. Now, if the pressure from Evo wasn't there, you might see the release in April or May, a little closer to summertime. A lot of those IRS refunds are coming around that time, so people get a little cavalier with their refunds if they're getting one. So my prediction on this is that you'll see it late March, the week of the 19th. Now again, I have no inside information here, but if that number hits, I'm going to look like a savant. If I'm off and this thing doesn't hit till September, I'm going to look like an idiot. But that's half the fun of putting these kind of clips together, is that I'm predicting with some certainty that this stuff's going to happen based on a lot of factors that I've taken into consideration. So my prediction for the release date on this would be the week of the 19th. And if you nailed me down to a day, I'm going to say the 23rd. So let's see what happens. Again, I'm sure DJI watches these clips from time to time, so there are probably people over there in the marketing department that are giggling at this point at me for making that level of prediction, but that's what I'm going with. So anyway, that's it for this clip. I hope I've given you enough information to sort of tease you a little bit about what this product might hold for you when it's released. I know that it's going to be exciting either way, and I think, honestly, my prediction overall is that when that Mavic Pro II hits the market, it'll be far and large the most popular quad they've ever released, and I expect people are going to snap them up left and right. So price-wise, I'm not sure where it's going to land. I'd probably put the price at around $12.99 for the basic model and probably around $14.99 or $15.99 for the Flymore package. But, you know, and again, if it's in your budget, you're going to want to jump on it. I just think it's going to be a fantastic quad from everything I think could be included in it. So we'll have to wait a couple of weeks and see. I hope that I get invited to the launch event like I've been lucky enough to be invited to the previous ones. And if that in fact happens, I'll be at the show. I'll do a lot of video footage from the floor and I'll put clips up and I'll be tweeting out about all the changes they made. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the clip. I really have a lot of fun putting these things together, and I know this one's pure speculation, but I'm hoping that by backing it up with some of the science that I gave you guys, that these predictions are a little bit more real than just sort of just guessing, you know, off the top of my head. So anyway, thanks an awful lot for watching. I've got a lot more stuff coming, so make sure you stay tuned or even subscribe. That would help us a lot. But thanks again. I really appreciate it. Until next time, happy flying.